The nervous system serves to help different parts of the body communicate quickly. In order for that to happen, the cells that make them up, neurons, must be able to send signals along their length and then across the gap to the next neuron in order for it to be able to send a signal. This is true for the neurons carrying sensory input from the sense organs to the central nervous system. It's also true for the neurons within the central nervous system that integrate that incoming sensory input. And it is true for the motor neurons that carry information from the central nervous system out to the muscles so that the body can react to the stimuli appropriately. In order to do that, neurons take advantage of 3 types of transport we learned at the beginning of the year: facilitated diffusion, simple diffusion, and active transport. To understand this in further detail, we're going to look at 2 neurons. Here's one, and here's the second. And we're going to look at their structures, for example, their axons and their dendrites. And we'll focus particularly on the occurrences at the synapse. The synapse is the name of the gap between the axon terminal on one neuron and the dendrite of the other. And we'll go through these as they chronologically occur. So let's say that this neuron right here wants to send a signal to this neuron. The presynaptic neuron wants to send a signal to the postsynaptic neuron. We'll start first with the signal that is traveling down this neuron's axon, which is called an action potential. Along this axon, there are many small protein channels that for the most part remain closed. However, when an action potential is traveling down the axon, it causes one channel to open, which then allows facilitated diffusion to occur of small particles called ions that go diffusing into the axon. When that occurs, it then triggers the next channel to open and the next channel to open, kind of like a series of dominoes, each one opening and then letting a little bit more facilitated diffusion happen and a little bit more facilitated diffusion happen, until you get all the way to the end of the axon at the axon terminal. In the axon terminal, you can find some other structures. They are called vesicles. Those are round organelles that are moved around inside the cell to transport things. And these vesicles contain small chemicals called neurotransmitters at high concentrations. Now, when the action potential finally makes its way to the axon terminal, here shown very largely, these vesicles don't stay put. Instead, they fuse with the outer membrane of the axon terminal. And when they do so, that means that the inside becomes contiguous with the outside. And now, a second kind of transport, diffusion, is able to take place. These neurotransmitters are at high concentration in this area that was once a vesicle, and they've got all this empty space, and so the molecules start to spread out by diffusion. And they spread and spread and spread into this space right here called the synapse. On the dendrite of the postsynaptic neuron, there is a structure ready to receive these neurotransmitters called a protein receptor. So it's a small protein molecule with a binding site that fits the neurotransmitter perfectly, and when the neurotransmitter lands inside, the protein receptor changes its shape. Like here, you can see these guys are kind of flat, they don't have any neurotransmitter in them, but when this one with a neurotransmitter gets bound, it changes its shape, you can see right here. And when it does so, it kicks a neighboring protein channel to being in the open position. So while this protein channel is closed because its receptor is empty, this protein channel is open thanks to the action of the neurotransmitter. And if enough of these channels open, that will trigger a new action potential to start forming on this new cell traveling in this direction, as the next channel opens and the next channel opens and the next channel opens, just like on the previous axon. Now, when one cell calls the other cell using these neurotransmitters, it doesn't want to call perpetually. Like if you reached out your hand to pause this video right where it is, you wouldn't want to keep your hand in the pausing position or you'd never get to the end of the video. You want to be able to pause and then stop. So in the same way, after this neuron has made its call to this neuron, it wants to be able to stop making that call. Well, there's no way to get these channels to close except by removing the neurotransmitter. And one way that the cells do that is with a recycling system. And here's the recycling system right here. It's a protein pump designed perfectly to take those neurotransmitters out of the synapse and put them back into the axon terminal. As they work, the neurotransmitters are going to accumulate at a high concentration, But that's okay. Because this is a protein pump, it can shove those neurotransmitters against their concentration gradient, even though they would prefer to be diffusing in the opposite direction. Once the neurotransmitters have been safely returned to the axon terminal, the neuron is reset, and the call from this neuron to the next neuron ready to happen only when appropriate. And all of this happens in faster than the blink of an eye.